Arya didn't know that the man walking past the open cells was the most powerful alpha in 5 kingdoms. She didn't know he could sense her wolf even through the silver chains that burned her wrists. And she certainly didn't know he had been searching for her for 3 years. The stone floor was cold against her bare feet as she pressed herself against the back wall of her cell. Around her the sounds of freedom echoed through the dungeon corridors. Metal clanged against metal. Chains rattled to the ground. Prisoners whooped with joy as cell doors swung wide, one after another, in the king's grand amnesty. "Thank the gods," someone sobbed 3 cells down. "I can finally go home." Home. Arya had forgotten what that word meant. 3 months in this place had stripped away everything she thought she knew about herself. The rough prison clothes hung loose on her frame. The bread they brought twice a day wasn't enough to sustain a shifter, especially not one whose wolf had been suppressed by silver for so long. But she was alive. That had to count for something. Heavy footsteps approached her cell, different from the hurried shuffle of guards or the eager bounce of freed prisoners. These steps were measured, deliberate, the kind that belonged to someone who had never questioned whether people would move out of his way. Arya lifted her head. The man standing outside her cell was tall enough that he had to duck slightly to peer through the barred window. Dark hair fell across his forehead, and when he raised his head to look at her directly, his eyes were the colour of storm clouds just before lightning struck. Everything about him screamed danger, from the way he held his shoulders to the expensive cut of his black coat. Something in her chest pulled tight. "You," he said, and his voice was deep enough that she felt it in her bones. "What's your name?" Every instinct she had developed in 3 months of survival screamed at her to stay quiet. Don't draw attention. Don't give them anything they could use against you. But when she opened her mouth, the words came anyway. "Arya." He nodded once, as if her answer confirmed something he already knew. The guard beside him fumbled with a ring of keys, hands shaking slightly as he searched for the right one. Arya noticed that the guard wouldn't quite meet the stranger's eyes. "Your Majesty," the guard stammered, "this one wasn't on the amnesty list. She's here for theft. Quite serious charges, I'm afraid." "Your Majesty." The blood in Arya's veins went cold. This was the Alpha King, the one whose mate bond ceremony the entire kingdom had been waiting for, the one who could order her execution with a word. "Open it," he said simply. The guard's hands shook harder. "Sir, with respect, the charges against her were fabricated." The Alpha King's voice cut through the guard's protests like a blade. "Open the cell." Metal scraped against metal as the lock turned. The door swung wide with a creak that seemed to echo through every corner of the dungeon. Arya remained pressed against the back wall, silver chains still wrapped around her wrists, watching as the most powerful man in 5 kingdoms stepped into her cell. He was even more overwhelming up close. Broad shoulders filled the small space. His scent hit her like a physical thing, pine and rain and something wild that made her wolf stir despite the silver burning her skin. When he moved toward her, she noticed he was careful to keep his steps slow and non-threatening. "Easy," he murmured, as if she were a frightened animal. "I'm not going to hurt you." "That's what they all say," she whispered. Something flickered across his expression. Pain, maybe, or recognition. He crouched down so they were at eye level, keeping his distance but close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his storm-grey eyes. "My name is Kieran," he said, "and you're coming with me." It wasn't a request, but it wasn't quite a command either. Something in between, like he was offering her a choice while making it clear that staying wasn't really an option. "I don't go anywhere with strangers," Arya said, even though every cell in her body was screaming at her to say yes, even though the golden warmth spreading through her chest felt like the first good thing that had happened to her in months. Kieran's mouth curved into something that might have been a smile. "You'll understand soon enough." He stood and extended his hand toward her. For a moment they stayed frozen like that, him offering, her staring at his outstretched palm, as if it might burn her worse than the silver. "The chains," she said finally, "will come off the moment we're out of here." His voice was gentle but certain. "I give you my word." Arya stared at his hand. 3 months ago, she would have laughed at the idea of trusting anyone, especially someone with this much power. 3 months ago, she'd had a sister to protect and a life to defend. Now she had nothing except the strange certainty that this man, this Alpha King, was offering her something she'd never thought she'd have again. A choice. Slowly, carefully, she reached up and placed her shackled hand in his. The moment their skin touched, warmth exploded through her entire body. Golden light seemed to dance behind her eyelids. Her wolf, silent for so long under the silver's suppression, suddenly lifted her head and howled with joy. Mate! The word echoed through every corner of her mind, certain and devastating and impossible all at once. Kieran's fingers tightened around hers, and when she looked up, she saw her own shock reflected in his eyes. Except his wasn't surprise. It was relief, like he'd been holding his breath for years and could finally exhale. "There you are," he said softly. "I've been looking everywhere for you." The carriage was the most beautiful thing Arya had ever seen. Velvet cushions in deep emerald green, silver fixtures that gleamed despite the grey afternoon light filtering through the windows. Even the blanket folded neatly in the corner looked like it cost more than she'd earned in her entire life before everything went wrong. She sat rigidly on the edge of the seat, afraid to lean back against the luxury. The silver shackles were gone. Kieran had removed them himself the moment they'd stepped out of the dungeon. But her wrists still bore the angry red marks where the metal had burned her skin. She kept touching the spots absently, unable to believe they were really gone. "You can relax," Kieran said from the seat across from her. "This is going to be a long journey." Arya glanced at him and immediately looked away. Without the dungeon's shadows between them, he was even more overwhelming. The expensive black coat fit him perfectly, tailored to emphasize the breadth of his shoulders. His dark hair was slightly tousled from the wind, and when he moved, she caught glimpses of a silver chain at his throat that probably cost more than most people saw in a lifetime. "Where are we going?" she asked. "Home." The word hit her like a physical blow. Home. She'd had one of those once. A tiny cottage she'd shared with her sister Maya, filled with laughter and the smell of whatever healing herbs Maya had been experimenting with that day. Before Lord Vex had decided Maya knew too much about his illegal dealings, before he'd ordered Maya's murder and framed Arya for theft to keep her quiet. "I don't have a home," she said quietly. Something shifted in Kieran's expression. Pain flickered across his features, there and gone so quickly she might have imagined it. "You do now." The carriage hit a bump in the road, and Arya's empty stomach clenched painfully. She pressed a hand against her middle, trying to quiet the gnawing hunger that had become her constant companion. "When did you last eat?" Kieran asked. "This morning. Bread and water?" The standard prison meal. She'd learned to make it last as long as possible, taking tiny bites to trick her body into thinking it was getting more. Kieran leaned forward and rapped twice on the carriage roof. The driver's voice came muffled through the wood. "Your Majesty." "Stop at the next inn. We need food." "Sir, if we stop now, we'll arrive after—" "Stop at the next inn," Kieran repeated, and there was something in his voice that made it clear the conversation was over. Arya stared at him. "You don't have to do that. I'm fine." "You're not fine." His voice was gentle but certain. "And you don't have to pretend to be. Not with me." The carriage began to slow, and through the window Arya could see a small roadside inn coming into view. Her stomach twisted again, this time with anxiety rather than hunger. She couldn't remember the last time she'd been in public as anything other than a prisoner or a servant. What if someone recognized her? What if they knew about the charges Lord Vex had brought against her? "Hey," Kieran's voice was soft. "Look at me." She lifted her eyes to his reluctantly. "You're under my protection now," he said. "No one is going to hurt you, I promise." There was something in the way he said it that made her believe him, even though believing anyone was dangerous, even though she'd learned the hard way that promises meant nothing when they came from people with power. The inn was warm and welcoming, with low wooden beams and the smell of fresh bread filling the air. The innkeeper took one look at Kieran and immediately began bowing and scraping, ushering them to the best table by the fireplace. Arya noticed that he called Kieran "Your Majesty," and that every other conversation in the room died down to whispers. "Your Majesty." "You're the king," she said when they were seated. It wasn't a question. "I am." "And you just walked into a dungeon and took me." The absurdity of it hit her all at once. "Why?" Kieran was quiet for a long moment, staring at the flames dancing in the fireplace. When he finally spoke, his voice was low enough that she had to lean forward to hear him. "I lost my parents when I was 16, he said. "Rogues attacked our summer estate. They died protecting the pack, and I became king overnight. For the past 10 years, I've been doing everything I was supposed to do, running the kingdom, making alliances, strengthening our borders." He paused, and something vulnerable flickered across his expression. "But there was always something missing, someone missing. I could feel it like a constant ache, you know, like half of my soul was somewhere else." Arya's breath caught. The golden warmth she'd felt when he'd touched her hand stirred in her chest again, responding to the pain in his voice. 3 years ago, I started having dreams, he continued. A woman with dark hair and eyes the colour of amber, always running, always afraid. I could never reach her in time. His gaze found hers across the table. "I've been searching ever since." "Dreams," she whispered. "You've had them too." It wasn't a question, but she nodded anyway. Dreams of a man with storm-grey eyes and gentle hands. Dreams where she felt safe for the first time in her life. Dreams that always ended with her waking up alone in her cell, tears on her cheeks. "I don't understand what this means," she said. "It means you're not alone anymore." Kieran reached across the table and covered her hand with his. The warmth spread up her arm, settling somewhere behind her sternum like a second heartbeat. "It means you're exactly where you're supposed to be." The innkeeper appeared with plates of food, roasted chicken and vegetables and bread that was still warm from the oven. Arya stared at it all, overwhelmed. When had she last seen a meal like this? When had anyone cared whether she was hungry? "Eat," Kieran said gently. "We have time." She took a tentative bite, and the flavours exploded across her tongue. Real food, prepared with care. She had to blink back tears at the simple kindness of it. "Tell me about your sister," Kieran said as she ate. The request caught her off guard. "Maya?" "I can see it in your eyes. When you think no one's watching, you look like you're carrying the weight of the world. Tell me about her." So Arya did. She told him about Maya's laugh and her gentle hands and her gift for healing. She told him about the night Lord Vex's men had come for Maya, claiming she'd been stealing supplies from his estate. She told him about finding Maya's body the next morning, and about Lord Vex's cold smile when he'd had Arya arrested for theft the same day. He killed her because she knew too much, Arya said, about his deals with the rogues, about the weapons he was selling. She tried to warn someone, and he made sure she could never tell anyone what she'd seen. Kieran's expression had grown darker and darker as she spoke. By the time she finished, his eyes looked like a storm about to break. "He'll answer for what he did," Kieran said, and his voice was deadly quiet. "I give you my word." "He's too powerful, too connected." "I'm the king, Arya, and you're—" He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "You're under my protection now. That makes you untouchable." There was something in the way he said "you're" that made her think he'd been about to say something else, something that would have changed everything. The carriage ride back to the road was quieter, but it was a comfortable silence instead of the tense anxiety from before. Kieran had given her his coat when she shivered, and now she was wrapped in fabric that smelled like him. pine and rain, and something wild that made her wolf restless in the best possible way. "How much farther?" she asked as the sun began to set. "We should reach the palace by midnight." Palace, of course, because he was the king, and kings lived in palaces, and she was going to be completely out of place there. The thought made her stomach clench with anxiety all over again. "What happens when we get there?" she asked. Kieran was quiet for a moment. "You'll have your own rooms, food whenever you want it, safety, time to heal." He met her eyes in the dim light. "And when you're ready, we'll figure out the rest." "What if I'm never ready?" "Then I'll wait," he said simply, "however long it takes." The certainty in his voice made her chest tight. When was the last time anyone had been willing to wait for her? When was the last time anyone had seen her as worth waiting for? "I don't understand why you're doing this," she said. Kieran leaned forward slightly, his storm-grey eyes intense in the carriage's dim light. "Because from the moment I saw you, everything made sense. The dreams, the searching, the feeling like I was walking through life half awake." His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "Because you're the other half of my soul, Arya, and I'd rather spend eternity earning your trust than one more day without you." The golden warmth in her chest flared bright and certain, and for the first time in 3 months, Arya allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she might actually be safe. Outside the carriage windows, the lights of the capital city began to twinkle in the distance like fallen stars, and Arya realized she was about to find out what it felt like to be home. The palace was impossible. Arya stood in the entrance hall, neck craned back to stare at the vaulted ceiling that seemed to stretch up forever. Crystal chandeliers caught the morning light and threw rainbows across marble floors, so polished she could see her reflection. Tapestries depicting great battles hung from the walls, and everywhere she looked there was gold. Gold picture frames, gold door handles, gold trim along the baseboards. She felt like a fraud in borrowed clothes, standing in the middle of all this wealth. "Overwhelming, isn't it?" Kieran's voice was warm beside her ear. "I felt the same way the first time I saw it. My parents brought me here when I was 7 to meet the previous king. I spent the entire visit convinced I was going to break something priceless." "Did you?" "A Ming vase in the blue sitting room, worth more than most people's houses." His mouth curved into a rueful smile. "I cried for an hour, convinced I'd brought shame to my entire family. The king just laughed and said it was about time someone brought some life to the stuffy old place." Despite herself, Arya smiled. It was impossible to imagine this powerful man as a tearful 7-year-old, but the image made him seem more human somehow. "Come on," Kieran said, placing a gentle hand at the small of her back. "Let me show you your rooms." Her rooms turned out to be a suite larger than the cottage she'd shared with Maya. There was a sitting area with plush chairs arranged around a fireplace, a bedroom with a 4-poster bed draped in silk, and a bathing chamber with a tub deep enough to swim in. Fresh flowers sat on every surface, filling the air with the scent of roses and lavender. "This is too much," Arya said, running her fingers along the edge of a mahogany writing desk. "I don't need all this." "You need safety," Kieran said quietly. "You need comfort. You need time to remember what it feels like to not be afraid." He moved to the windows and pulled back heavy curtains, revealing a view of sprawling gardens. "You need space to heal." The word hit her like a physical blow. Heal. As if what had happened to her was a wound that could close with enough time and care. As if she could ever go back to being the person she'd been before Maya died. "I don't know how to do this," she admitted. "Do what?" "This." She gestured around the beautiful room. "Live like this. Be someone who deserves this." Kieran turned from the window, and the expression on his face was so fierce it took her breath away. "You deserve every good thing this world has to offer, Arya, and anyone who told you otherwise was lying." Before she could argue, a soft knock came at the door. Kieran called for whoever it was to enter, and a woman with kind eyes and greying hair stepped into the room. "This is Mrs. Hartwell," Kieran said. "She runs the household staff. If you need anything, food, clothes, someone to talk to, she's the person to ask." Mrs. Hartwell smiled warmly. "It's a pleasure to meet you, miss. I've had the kitchen prepare some tea and cakes if you'd like. Nothing too heavy after your journey." Arya blinked in surprise. When was the last time someone had anticipated her needs? When was the last time anyone had cared whether she was hungry or tired or comfortable? "That's very kind," she managed. "Nonsense. It's what we do here. We take care of our own." Mrs. Hartwell's eyes flicked meaningfully to Kieran, and Arya caught the subtext. We take care of people the king cares about. The days that followed settled into a strange rhythm. Mornings in the garden with Kieran, walking among the roses while he told her stories about the kingdom's history. Afternoons in the library, where she discovered shelves upon shelves of books she'd never dreamed of reading. Evenings by the fire in her sitting room, sometimes alone, sometimes with Kieran keeping her company while she worked on the embroidery Mrs. Hartwell had brought her. He never pushed, never demanded more than she was ready to give. When she flinched away from unexpected touches, he simply gave her more space. When she grew quiet and withdrawn, lost in memories of Maya, he waited patiently until she was ready to talk again. It should have been perfect. But Arya couldn't shake the feeling that she was living someone else's life, that any moment guards would appear to drag her back to her cell where she belonged. The clothes in her wardrobe, beautiful dresses in silk and velvet, felt like costumes. The servants who curtsied when they saw her seemed to be playing along with an elaborate joke. "You look troubled," Kieran said one evening. They were sitting by the fire in the library, and she'd been staring at the same page of her book for 20 minutes. "I keep waiting for this to end," she admitted, "for you to realise you've made a mistake." Kieran set down his own book and turned to face her fully. "What kind of mistake?" "I'm nobody, Kieran, a thief's daughter from the slums. I don't know how to be a lady. I don't know how to live in a palace or talk to nobles or any of the things that someone in your life would need to know." "Arya." His voice was gentle but certain. "Look at me." She lifted her eyes to his reluctantly. "You're not nobody," he said. "You're brave enough to have survived 3 months in that prison without breaking. You're kind enough to worry about whether you deserve kindness in return. You're strong enough to have protected your sister for as long as you could, and loyal enough to have never betrayed her secrets even when it would have saved your life." His storm grey eyes held hers steadily. "You're everything I've been looking for, exactly as you are." The golden warmth in her chest flared bright and certain. Her wolf, growing stronger every day as her body healed from the silver poisoning, lifted her head and howled with joy. "I'm scared," she whispered. Of what?" "Of believing you, of letting myself think this is real." Her voice cracked. "What if you change your mind? What if someone better comes along? What if—" "Arya." Kieran leaned forward and took her hands in his, careful to move slowly enough that she could pull away if she wanted to. "There is no one better. There never could be. You're my mate, my other half. The dreams I've been having for 3 years, they were all about you." "I know, but nothing." His thumbs stroked gently across her knuckles. "I would rather spend the rest of my life earning your trust than one more day pretending I don't need you like I need air to breathe." Before she could respond, urgent footsteps echoed in the hallway outside. A moment later, Captain Morrison of the Royal Guard appeared in the doorway, his face grim. "Your Majesty," he said, breathing hard. "Lord Vex is here. He's demanding an audience, claiming you've unlawfully harboured a fugitive." Arya's blood went cold. Of course. She'd been foolish to think she could hide here forever, that Vex wouldn't eventually come looking for her. "He's brought armed men," Captain Morrison continued, "and he's invoking some old law about blood debt, claims the girl belongs to him." Kieran was on his feet instantly, and when Arya looked at him, she barely recognised the man who'd been reading quietly by the fire moments before. This was the Alpha King, dangerous and deadly, and absolutely furious. "Over my dead body," he said, his voice carrying enough command to make the captain straighten unconsciously. "Sir, he's demanding to see her, to present his case before the court." "Then he'll see her," Kieran said, "but not the way he's expecting." He turned to Arya, and his expression softened slightly. "I need you to trust me. Can you do that?" Every instinct she had screamed at her to run, to find a way out of the palace before Vex could get his hands on her again. But when she looked into Kieran's storm-grey eyes, she saw something that made her wolf settle with confidence. Protection. Fierce, unwavering, absolute protection. "Yes," she said, "I trust you." The smile that crossed Kieran's face was sharp as a blade. "Good, because it's time Lord Vex learned exactly who he's been threatening." As they made their way toward the throne room, Arya's heart pounded against her ribs. But for the first time since this all began, it wasn't entirely from fear. There was something else there too. Hope. Because Kieran had called her his mate in front of witnesses. Because he'd looked ready to go to war for her. Because when she'd said she trusted him, she'd meant it with every fibre of her being. Whatever happened next, she wasn't facing it alone anymore. The throne room had never felt so vast or so suffocating at the same time. Arya stood beside Kieran's throne, wearing a dress Mrs. Hartwell had chosen for her, deep blue silk that brought out the amber in her eyes. Her hands trembled slightly, but she kept them clasped in front of her, determined not to show weakness, not here, not in front of him. Lord Vex stood in the centre of the room like a predator who'd finally cornered his prey. He was exactly as Arya remembered, tall and sharp-featured, with pale eyes that seemed to see straight through people to their weaknesses. His dark hair was perfectly styled, his expensive clothes immaculate. Everything about him screamed wealth and power and the kind of cruelty that came with knowing you were untouchable. Behind him stood 6 armed men in his house colours, and Arya recognised 2 of them as the ones who'd killed Maya. Her stomach turned, but she forced herself to remain still. The court had assembled to witness whatever spectacle Vex intended to make. Nobles filled the gallery, whispering behind fans and jewelled hands. Arya could feel their stares like physical things, curious, judgmental, eager for drama. "Your Majesty," Vex said with a bow that managed to seem mocking despite its technical correctness. "Thank you for seeing me on such short notice." Kieran didn't respond immediately. He sat on his throne like he'd been carved from stone, every inch the Alpha King. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the kind of authority that made lesser men shrink. "Lord Vex, you've made some serious accusations. Speak your piece." Vex's pale eyes found Arya, and his smile was razor-sharp. "The woman beside you is a convicted thief, Your Majesty. She was lawfully imprisoned for stealing from my estate. By removing her from her cell without proper authorization, you've interfered with justice." "Lawfully imprisoned," Kieran repeated, and there was something dangerous in his tone. "Based on what evidence?" "Testimony from my guards, physical evidence found in her possession, a confession signed in her own hand." Arya's jaw clenched. The confession she'd signed after 3 days without food or water, after Vex's men had beaten her until she could barely stand. The confession that had been the only way to stop them from going after Maya's body. "Furthermore," Vex continued, his voice growing more confident, "there is the matter of blood debt. Her sister was in my employ when she died. According to the old laws, any debts she owed transfer to her living relatives." His smile turned predatory. "The girl belongs to me." A murmur went through the court. Arya felt heat rise in her cheeks as dozens of eyes assessed her like she was livestock being evaluated at market. "Interesting theory," Kieran said, his voice deadly calm. "Tell me, Lord Vex, what exactly did you employ Maya for?" Something flickered in Vex's expression. "She was a healer, tended to injuries among my household guard." "A healer," Kieran repeated. "How convenient. And these injuries she treated, they were the result of what exactly?" "Training accidents, border skirmishes." Vex's answer came too quickly. The usual hazards of a fighting force. Border skirmishes. Kieran leaned forward slightly. With whom? Various threats. Rogues, bandits. Vex's composure was starting to crack, just barely, but Arya could see it. Your Majesty, with respect, we're here to discuss the matter of the thief, not my household management. We're here, Kieran said, rising from his throne, to discuss the matter of justice, something you seem to have forgotten the meaning of. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Kieran moved down the steps from his throne with predatory grace, and Arya saw several of Vex's men instinctively reach for their weapons. You see, Kieran continued conversationally, I've done some investigating since our guest arrived. Amazing what you can learn when you actually ask the right questions. For instance, did you know that Maya was treating wounds consistent with silver poisoning? The kind of wounds that happen when someone is regularly handling silver weapons? Vex's face had gone pale. I don't know what you're implying. I'm not implying anything. I'm stating facts. Kieran's voice carried the full weight of royal command now. You were selling silver weapons to rogue packs. Maya discovered your operation and threatened to expose you, so you had her killed and framed her sister to keep her quiet. The court exploded into whispers. Arya heard gasps of shock, mutters of outrage, the rustle of silk as people shifted in their seats to get a better view. You have no proof, Vex snarled, his careful composure finally cracking completely. Don't I? Kieran smiled, and it was terrifying. Captain Morrison, please bring in our witnesses. The throne room doors opened, and 3 people entered. Arya recognised them immediately, servants from Vex's estate, people who'd been kind to Maya during her employment there, people she thought were too afraid to speak. These brave individuals have testified under oath about what they witnessed, Kieran continued. The silver weapons in your private armoury, the meetings with rogue leaders, the night you ordered Maya's death because she'd seen too much. Lies, Vex spat. All of it. You cannot take the word of servants over a lord. I can take the word of anyone I choose, Kieran said, and his voice had gone deadly quiet. Because I am the king, and because the woman you're trying to claim through blood debt is my mate. The throne room went dead silent. Arya's heart stopped beating for a moment. He'd said it. In front of the entire court, he'd claimed her as his mate. The golden warmth in her chest flared so bright it was almost painful. Your mate? Vex laughed, but there was desperation in it now. Your Majesty, surely you're not serious. She's a commoner, a thief. She's nothing. She, Kieran said, turning to look at Arya with such fierce tenderness that her breath caught, is everything. He moved toward her then, and when he reached out his hand, she took it without hesitation. The moment their fingers touched, that golden warmth exploded through both of them, bright enough that several people in the front row gasped. She is brave, Kieran said, his voice carrying to every corner of the room. She is kind, she is loyal beyond measure. She protected her sister's secrets even when it cost her everything. She survived 3 months in prison without breaking, and she is mine as I am hers by bonds older and stronger than any law you could invoke. This is madness, Vex snarled. You would throw away your crown for a common criminal. I would burn the world to keep her safe, Kieran said simply, but I don't think it will come to that. He turned back to the court, his hand still holding Arya's tightly. Lord Vex, you are charged with treason, murder, and conspiracy with enemy forces. Your lands are forfeit, your titles stripped. You and your men will be taken to the dungeons to await trial. You cannot... Vex started forward, rage twisting his features. He never finished the sentence. Kieran moved faster than Arya's eyes could follow. One moment Vex was advancing, the next he was on his knees with Kieran's hand around his throat, and the full force of the Alpha King's power pressing down on him like a physical weight. Touch her, Kieran said softly, and you die. For a moment, the only sound in the throne room was Vex's laboured breathing. Then Kieran released him and stepped back, and the royal guards moved in to take Vex and his men into custody. As they dragged Vex away, he turned back one last time, his face twisted with hatred. "This isn't over," he snarled at Arya. "You think you've won something, but all you've done is paint a target on your back. There are others who know what you are, others who will come for you." "Let them come," Kieran said, moving to stand protectively in front of Arya. "They'll find her under the protection of the crown. They'll find her claimed by the Alpha King, and they'll discover exactly what happens to people who threaten what's mine." The doors closed behind Vex with a final echoing boom. For a moment the throne room was silent. Then the court erupted into noise, excited chatter, shocked exclamations, the buzz of a scandal that would be talked about for years. But Arya barely heard any of it. Kieran had turned to face her, and the expression in his storm-grey eyes made everything else fade away. "Are you all right?" he asked softly. "You called me your mate," she whispered, "in front of everyone." "I called you what you are." His free hand came up to cup her cheek gently. "What you've always been, from the moment I saw you." "People will talk. They'll say you're making a mistake." "People will say what they will, but they'll say it about their queen." His thumb brushed across her cheekbone. "If you'll have me." The golden warmth in her chest had settled into something steady and sure. Not the desperate pull of desperation, but the quiet certainty of home. "Yes," she said, and the word came out stronger than she'd expected. "Yes, I'll have you." When Kieran kissed her, right there in front of the entire court, Arya finally understood what it meant to be chosen. Not rescued, chosen, not saved, claimed. And for the first time in her life, she felt worthy of it. The court cheered around them, but all Arya could hear was the steady beating of Kieran's heart and the quiet voice of her wolf, finally at peace. "Mine," the voice whispered. "Ours. Home." The morning after the confrontation, Arya woke in Kieran's arms for the first time. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows of his chambers, casting golden patterns across the silk sheets. She could feel the steady rise and fall of his chest beneath her cheek, could hear the strong, even rhythm of his heartbeat. His arm was wrapped around her waist, holding her close even in sleep, as if he were afraid she might disappear. She'd never felt so safe in her entire life. "Good morning." Kieran's voice was rough with sleep, warm against her ear. "Good morning." She tilted her head up to look at him, and the smile that crossed his face made her chest tight with happiness. "How did you sleep?" "Better than I have in months." It was true. For the first time since Maya's death, she'd slept through the night without nightmares, without waking in a cold sweat, reaching for a sister who would never answer. "You?" "Perfectly." His fingers traced lazy patterns along her spine. "I dreamed about you." "Good dreams this time." "The best." He pressed a soft kiss to the top of her head. "Dreams where you stayed." The words hit deeper than they should have. Arya had spent so much of her life running, from Lord Vex's accusations, from her grief, from the possibility that she might actually deserve the good things happening to her. But lying here in Kieran's arms, she realized she didn't want to run anymore. She wanted to stay. "Kieran," she said softly, "what you said yesterday, about me being your queen. Did I move too fast?" Concern flickered in his storm-grey eyes. "I know it's a lot to take in. We can wait, take things slowly." "No." She pressed her palm against his chest, feeling the steady thrum of his heart beneath her fingers. "I don't want to wait. I'm tired of being afraid, tired of thinking I don't deserve this." She met his gaze steadily. "I want to be your queen. I want to be your mate. I want to build something with you." The smile that spread across Kieran's face was devastating. "Are you sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." He kissed her then, soft and sweet and full of promise. When they broke apart, there were tears in his eyes. "I have something for you," he said. He reached over to the bedside table and picked up a small wooden box. When he opened it, Arya gasped. Inside was the most beautiful ring she'd ever seen. a golden band set with a stone the exact colour of amber, surrounded by smaller gems that caught the morning light like captured stars. "It was my mother's," Kieran said quietly. "She would have loved you." Arya's throat closed up. "Kieran, I can't. It's too much." "It's not enough," he said firmly. "Nothing could ever be enough for you, but it's a start." He took the ring from the box and held it out to her. "Arya, will you marry me? Will you be my queen, my mate, my everything?" The golden warmth in her chest blazed so bright it almost hurt. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, of course, yes." When he slipped the ring onto her finger, it fit perfectly, like it had been made for her, like everything in her life had led to this moment. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of preparations and discoveries. Wedding plans, dress fittings, meetings with nobles who needed to be convinced that their new queen was worthy of their loyalty. Arya threw herself into it all, determined to prove that Kieran's faith in her wasn't misplaced. But it was the quiet moments that meant the most. Mornings in the garden, where Kieran had commissioned a memorial for Maya. A beautiful stone bench surrounded by healing herbs, chamomile, lavender, echinacea, all the plants Maya had loved to work with. Arya would sit there for hours, telling her sister about her new life, about the man who'd saved her, about the happiness she'd never thought she'd find. She would have liked him, Arya said one evening, as she and Kieran sat together on Maya's bench, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. "How can you be sure?" "Because he makes me laugh." Arya leaned against Kieran's shoulder, breathing in his familiar scent of pine and rain. "Maya always said I was too serious, that I needed someone who could make me see the joy in things." "And do I? Make you see the joy?" Arya tilted her head up to look at him. "You make me see everything differently. You make me believe I'm worth loving." The expression that crossed Kieran's face was so fierce, so protective, that it took her breath away. "You are worth loving," he said. "You're worth everything good this world has to offer." Those words might have sounded empty once. Now Arya was beginning to believe them. The healing work came naturally. Too naturally, according to some of the older nobles, who whispered about bloodlines and whether a commoner could truly understand the responsibilities of power. But Arya had grown up watching Maya heal people, had learned to see past surface wounds to the deeper hurts that needed tending. When former prisoners came to the palace seeking help, people who'd been where she'd been, who understood what it meant to have nothing, Arya was there for them. She helped them find work, find homes, find hope. She listened to their stories and shared her own when it helped them believe that things could get better. "You have a gift," Mrs. Hartwell said one afternoon, watching Arya comfort a young woman who'd been wrongfully imprisoned for months. Not just for healing bodies, but for healing hearts. "I know what it's like," Arya said simply, "to feel like you're nothing, to believe you'll never be worth anything to anyone. And now?" Arya looked across the room to where Kieran was deep in conversation with Captain Morrison, planning improvements to the prison system so that what had happened to her would never happen to anyone else. As if he could feel her watching, he looked up and smiled, and the golden warmth in her chest flared bright and certain. "Now I know better," she said. The night before their wedding, Arya stood on the balcony of her chambers, looking out over the kingdom that would soon be hers to help protect and serve. The lights of the capital twinkled below like earthbound stars, and she could hear the sounds of celebration drifting up from the streets. Tomorrow she would become Queen Arya. Tomorrow she would bind herself to Kieran before gods and witnesses and the entire realm. Tomorrow she would step fully into the life she'd never dared to dream of. "Second thoughts?" Kieran's voice came from behind her, warm and teasing. "Never." She turned to face him, and the love in his storm-grey eyes made her breath catch. "Are you sure you want to marry a former prisoner, a common thief?" "I want to marry the woman who survived 3 months in hell and came out stronger. I want to marry the woman who protected her sister's secrets, even when it cost her everything. I want to marry the woman who makes me want to be a better king, a better man, a better mate." He moved toward her, and when he reached out, she took his hands without hesitation. "I want to marry you, Arya, just as you are, just as you've always been." The golden thread that connected them pulsed with warmth and certainty. Her wolf, strong and healthy now, lifted her head and howled with pure joy. "Then marry me," Arya said, standing on her toes to kiss him. "Make me your queen, make me yours forever." "You already are," Kieran whispered against her lips. "You always have been." When they kissed under the starlight, Arya felt something click into place inside her chest. Not just the mate bond, though that was there, golden and unbreakable. Something deeper. The knowledge that she was exactly where she belonged, that she was home. Tomorrow would bring a crown and a kingdom and responsibility she was still learning to understand. But tonight, wrapped in Kieran's arms with the lights of their realm sparkling below them, Arya finally understood what it meant to be chosen. Not rescued, not saved, chosen. And she had never felt more worthy of it. 3 months later, Queen Arya stood in Maya's memorial garden, watching the sunrise paint the healing herbs in shades of gold and pink. She wore a simple morning dress, her hair loose around her shoulders, the crown Kieran had commissioned for her resting forgotten on the stone bench. Out here, surrounded by chamomile and lavender and all the plants her sister had loved, she felt more like herself than she ever had in the throne room. "I thought I might find you here." Kieran's voice was warm behind her, familiar as her own heartbeat now. She turned to smile at him, and her breath caught at the sight of him in the morning light, her husband, her king, her mate. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked. "Didn't want to." He moved to stand beside her, wrapping his arms around her waist from behind. "I kept thinking about this day 3 months ago. How terrified you were, how brave." Arya leaned back against his chest, safe and warm and completely content. "I was terrified," she admitted. "I thought for sure I was going to embarrass myself, trip on my dress, forget my vows, something." "You were perfect." Kieran's lips brushed against her ear. "You are perfect." The wedding had been beautiful in its simplicity. Kieran had insisted they keep it small, just the people who mattered, the ones who'd stood by them through everything. Mrs. Hartwell had cried through the entire ceremony. Captain Morrison had actually smiled, which several people claimed was the first time they'd seen such a phenomenon. And when Kieran had kissed her after they'd spoken their vows, the golden warmth that blazed between them had been visible to everyone present. "Any regrets?" Kieran asked softly. Arya turned in his arms to face him. "About which part? Marrying the Alpha King? Becoming queen of a realm I knew nothing about? Taking on responsibilities I'm still learning to handle?" "Any of it. All of it." She reached up to cup his face in her hands, studying the storm-grey eyes that had become her anchor. "Ask me that question every day for the rest of our lives," she said. "The answer will always be no." The smile that spread across Kieran's face was devastating. "Good, because I have something for you." "Another something? Kieran, you gave me a crown, and a kingdom, and yourself. What more could I possibly need?" "This." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a letter, sealed with official wax. "News from the eastern border." Arya's stomach clenched. Ever since Lord Vex's arrest, there had been whispers of unrest among his former allies, rumours that other nobles had been involved in his treasonous dealings. She'd been waiting for the other shoe to drop. "What kind of news?" she asked carefully. "The best kind." Kieran's grin widened. "The last of Vex's conspirators have been captured. Captain Thorne found their hidden supply of silver weapons and enough evidence to prove their guilt beyond doubt. It's over, Arya, all of it." The letter fell from her suddenly nerveless fingers. "Over? Over. Lord Vex will spend the rest of his life in prison. His allies have been stripped of their titles and lands. The rogue packs they were supplying have been scattered." Kieran's hands settled on her waist, steady and sure. No one is coming for you. No one is going to try to take you away from me. We're safe." Arya stared at him, hardly daring to believe it. For so long she'd been waiting for disaster to strike, for someone to challenge their happiness, for the past to reach out and drag her back into darkness. "Safe," she repeated. "Safe," Kieran confirmed, "free to build our life together, free to focus on the kingdom, on each other, on whatever comes next. Whatever comes next." Arya's hand moved instinctively to her stomach, where she'd been feeling strange flutterings for the past few weeks, where Mrs. Hartwell suspected with twinkling eyes that new life might already be growing. She hadn't told Kieran yet, hadn't wanted to add another layer of complexity to everything they were already navigating. But now, with the morning sun warm on her face and the scent of healing herbs in the air and the absolute certainty that they were finally, truly safe. "Kieran," she said softly, "there's something I need to tell you." Something in her tone made him go very still. "What is it?" "I think, that is, Mrs. Hartwell thinks, we might be—" She took a shaky breath. "I might be carrying your child." For a moment, Kieran just stared at her. Then his face lit up like the sun breaking through storm clouds. "Ah, a child," he breathed. "Our child." "Are you happy?" The question came out smaller than she'd intended. "I know we haven't talked about timing, and with everything that's been happening—" "Happy?" Kieran laughed, spinning her around until she was breathless and giggling. "Arya, I'm ecstatic. A little person who's half you and half me. How could I be anything but thrilled?" When he set her down, there were tears in both their eyes. "I love you," he said, cupping her face in his hands. "I love you so much it terrifies me sometimes." "I love you too." The words came easily now, natural as breathing. "I love the life we've built. I love the future we're going to have. I love that our children will grow up knowing they're wanted and cherished and safe." "They will," Kieran promised fiercely. "I swear to you, they'll never know what it's like to be afraid or unloved or alone." Arya believed him. More than that, she knew he was right. Their children would grow up in a palace filled with laughter and love. They would have parents who adored each other and them. They would know from their very first breath that they belonged. "Mrs. Hartwell is going to be impossible when we tell her," Arya said, wiping at her eyes. "She's already planning nurseries." "Let her plan. Let her be happy. We all deserve to be happy." They stood there in the garden as the sun climbed higher, talking about cribs and names and whether their first child would have Kieran's grey eyes or Arya's amber ones. Simple domestic conversations that would have seemed impossible just months ago. The kind of future planning that people did when they felt secure in their love and their place in the world. Eventually, duty would call them back inside. There were council meetings to attend and petitions to hear, and a kingdom to govern. But for now, they had this. The morning light on healing herbs, the warmth of each other's arms, and the quiet certainty that they were exactly where they belonged. "I used to have nightmares," Arya said as they walked back toward the palace, her hand safely tucked in Kieran's. "About being back in that cell, about waking up and discovering all of this was just a dream. And now? Now I dream about our children playing in Maya's garden, about growing old with you, about all the good we're going to do together." She squeezed his hand. "I dream about forever." Kieran stopped walking and pulled her into his arms, right there on the garden path. When he kissed her, it tasted like promises and hope and home. "Forever sounds perfect to me," he murmured against her lips. As they walked into their palace, into their future, Arya marvelled at the journey that had brought her here. From a prison cell to a throne. From believing herself worthless to knowing she was precious. From running and hiding to standing still and choosing love. She was Queen Arya now, mate to the Alpha King, soon to be mother to the next generation of the royal line. But more than any of that, she was simply, completely, utterly happy. And she planned to be, for the rest of her very long life.